Hi students, welcome back to Communication 1250. Sorry, 1250, which is interpersonal communication. And today we're going to talk about chapter 3, which is perceiving others. So in the previous chapter, we put the lens to ourselves and we try to understand ourselves better. But in this chapter, we try to understand how we look at the world and the people around us. So in this chapter, what we're going to discuss is we're going to talk about perception as a process. We're also going to talk about influences on perception, and we're going to talk about forming impressions of others and strategies for improving our perception. All right, so let's start from the very beginning. It's important for us to understand that our perception of the world, of the people around us, is actually not just a one-time thing, but it is a process. And most social scientists agree that the world we know is not out there. Rather, we create our reality with others through communications. I thought that this illustration goes great for this idea of perception process, because you know how the world around us depends on our perspective. For the person who's on that very tiny island, that person thought that he's being safe, whereas for the person on the boat, he thought that he was being safe by thinking that he saw a land and he finally can be, landed to a place that he can be safe. But again, everything depends on the perspective. So it's important to think about how we, as different people, we always use different lenses in looking at the world around us. If you're so familiar with the phrase about the glass half empty or half full, then you know what I'm talking about. Because as a human being, we perceive the world in ways that largely match our own beliefs, attitude, and experiences. So if we have this kind of inner, compass or inner values that makes us believe in a certain way how the world around us are shaped, then it will genuinely affect how we experience the world. Therefore, it is very easy to become attached to the truth of our individual perspectives. And when we fail to consider alternative viewpoints, perceptual divides are created. And I think we can, it's very easy for us to draw from our own experience about this one. Okay, so let's start about the perception process. Your textbook is emphasizing that perception is the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting information from our senses. So we start by selection, which is the process in which our mind and body help us to choose certain stimuli to attend to. So research or studies show that we tend to pay attention to unusual or unexpected stimuli. So for instance, if you are so used to getting up in the morning, getting ready, and then go out from your house and then go to your car and then drive to your work, you may not pay attention to your surrounding as much, but then when you heard a loud bang, as you walk to your car, then you get startled and then you pay attention. That's something that is unusual or unexpected, and that interrupts your attention, and makes you pay attention to that unusual or unexpected stimuli. You also may think about repetition. Our brain somehow just get hooked into paying attention to something that is repetitive, something that's always has always been done exactly the same. So for instance, in the morning when you step out from your house and then you see your neighbor going outside or picking up the mail or something like that, you would always say good morning to your neighbor. So this is like a repetition of actions, and somehow your brain just absorbed that. And then also we're talking about intensity. So let's go back to that loud bang for instance. Because of the loudness of the sound, you pay attention to it. So an intensity of an action makes you pay attention to it. The degree to which particular people or aspects of their communications attract our attention is known as salience. Yeah. The next stage of the perception is organizations. So if the first one you select, the second one you organize the information. So again, organization is the process that helps you make sense of the information by revealing how it is similar to and different from other things you know about. So during organization, we engage in punctuation, structuring the information we've selected into chronological sequence that matches how we experience the ordinary events. So think about how when we try to make sense of an incident that happened in the past, and we're trying to restructure it and tell that as a story to somebody else, we would try to make sure that it goes linear from the starting point all the way to the ending point, right? So it's so fascinating how our brain works to organize this information so that we can make sense of it. And I thought that this illustration from Calvin and Hobbes is a good one as well. And you will see that I will try to include some illustrations that hopefully will make the concepts a lot easier for you to understand. Now, the third one in the process after selection, organization, is interpretation. So interpretation is the process of assigning meaning to information that has been selected for attention and has been organized. Several factors cause us to interpret a person's behavior in one way or another. For example, we use familiar information that resides in the schemata for us to interpret what's going on. And we also create explanations using attributions, which of course can lead to fundamental attributions errors. So I encourage you to read carefully your chapter 3 of your textbook so that you can understand all of these concepts better. What is schemata? What is fundamental attribution errors? You will be able to find those information in your textbook. And then the last step is actually negotiations. This is the process by which communicators influence each other's perception. And it can operate in a very subtle ways, and it can also operate through stories or narratives we tell each other. When our stories clash with those of others, we can either hang on to our own point of view or try to negotiate a narrative that creates at least some common ground. Note that the 4 stages of perception, selection, organizing, interpreting information, and negotiation overlap. The process is actually not always linear. So your brain can multitask, and several stages can happen at the same time. So when we're talking about common tendencies in perceptions, these are some of the common tendencies that we tend to make when we're perceiving others. We tend to make snap judgments. Remember that first impression matters, for instance. That's a kind of snap judgment that we tend to cling to first impressions, and we judge ourselves more charitably than we do others. For instance, when we run late to attend a class, for instance, we can say that, oh, it happened because traffic today was incredibly horrible, for instance, versus when when we saw our classmate running late 10 minutes or 15 minutes late, and we're like, They're just not, getting ready on time, and so they're always coming late. So that's an example of how we tend to judge ourselves more charitably than we do others. So we are also influenced by our expectations, right? When we have specific expectations, we kind of have a judgment of how we're perceiving a situation, of how we're perceiving others. We're also influenced by the obvious. Think about this. And we assume, this is something that's very common, we assume others are like us. Whenever we're making a decision, we like to assume that others are going to think the way we do. But that's not always the case. And I think almost always they probably have a different way of perceiving the situation or looking at things through a completely different lens. So I'm going to stop here and ask you to just think of the 6 common tendencies in perceptions, which one do you most identify with? And I do want you to think about this because I think as we go about in our life, we tend to have this kind of common tendencies when we're making, when we're perceiving others. Now, the next parts are, I'm going to basically just summarize it. Because when we're thinking about how we perceive others, we need to understand that there are forces that influence our perceptions. We're going to talk about culture in a bit more in-depth way when we're covering chapter 5, but we definitely would like to touch on how culture, gender, and personality affect our perception. You will understand how, our own culture, our gender, as well as our personality, affect the way we perceive others by reading your textbook. And then the textbook also goes deeper into forming impression of others. And there are so many different key concepts. For instance, interpersonal impressions, Gestalt, positivity bias, algebraic impressions, right? And these are concepts that I do want you to pay attention to as you're reading your textbook, because these concepts I'm going to ask in the quiz as well as in the midterm exam. Yeah. The book will also talk about stereotyping, right? How we tend to stereotype because it's the easiest way for our brain to organize information, and we like to make a quick, we like to jump to a conclusion and create this kind of stereotypes. And then the book also talk about how we can improve our perception. I think you will find a theme throughout the textbook, and that is that when we're talking about how we can be better in communicating, in perceiving ourselves, perceiving others, empathy is always comes up. Yeah, it always comes up. It's one of the most valuable tools for communicating competently with others. So when we experience empathy, we feel into others' thoughts and emotions, making an attempt to both understand their perspectives and be aware of their feelings in order to identify with them. And then the next one that's also equally important is perception checking. This involves 3 parts, which is a description of the behavior you notice, 2 possible interpretations of the behavior, and a request for clarification about how to interpret the behavior. And the reason why it's equally important is because it's our way to stop our brain from making a quick or a snap judgment. Instead, we stop ourselves and we ask ourselves, is it true that there's only one way to interpret this situation? Can it be another scenario for us to understand it? And so by requesting a clarification about how to interpret the behavior, we're actually making an active attempt to do what we call as perception checking. And then the last one is 2 lecture check questions. All right, I think that's it. That's my short lecture for chapter 3. I do encourage you to read it. It's full of information, and I hope you'll be able to enjoy learning more about perceiving others. Thank you.